Hi, I'm Emily and welcome to Pepper Knits. I am a knitter based in Perth in Western Australia, and thank you for joining me for episode 11 of the podcast. I have 3 finished objects to share and also 3 brand new works in progress that haven't made onto the podcast before. It's been quite a while since I filmed a podcast, so I was trying to remember where I was up to and everything, but I'm fairly sure I haven't shown any of these whips before, so let's jump right into talking about the knitting. So finished object number 1 is what I'm wearing. This is my Daisy sweater by Solvara from Solvara Knitwear. I've shown this on the podcast a few times, so I won't go into too much detail. If you wanted to know any more or about some of the challenges that I faced knitting this, apart from the obvious fact that it's all over colourwork in 4-ply, then you can check out my previous episodes to learn a little bit more. So here's a better view of the sweater. I can also put in some photos that show it off a little bit better, although I think in the photos it's kind of hard to tell that the middle bits are yellow. It isn't super high contrast. Definitely in person you can see that the yellow centres are a lot brighter. For some reason on cameras it doesn't pick it up as well, but in person I think it looks really good. So the Daisy sweater is an all-over colourwork raglan. It's a compound raglan, and I knit this in the size 2 in the recommended yarn, which is the Isager Tvinni yarn, and I use the colour 0, which is the white, and 19, which is this hot pink colour. I also had to go down a needle size from the recommended 4mm and went to a 3.5mm needle, which is kind of typical for me. I think I'm a bit of a looser knitter in general. It just depends on the designer and the techniques that are being used, but for this one I did decide to go down just to make my attention look a little bit neater and also to meet gauge. I'm really happy with the amount of ease that this one has. It's no way too tight, but it's also not hugely oversized, so I think it's a good in-between. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. As you can see, there's definitely a little bit of room here. It's not clinging too tight to me, especially in this a bit more rustic yarn. So in the last episode I had finished one sleeve and I think I had blocked the whole sweater, and I was working on the second sleeve, and I'd also added some of the duplicate stitching for the yellow bits in the middle. Since then I've obviously knit the second sleeve and then reblocked the whole sweater and finished adding in all of the duplicate stitching. I did raise a concern in my last episode as well about the collar and the way it was sitting. It was kind of sticking up a little bit. It wasn't the most flattering, and I think a lot of that has blocked out. I've also worn it for a few days, so I think just the wear and softening up of the fabric has relaxed the wool a little bit more and allowed the collar to sit a lot flatter. It's definitely not exactly how I like collars to sit. You can probably see that it's rising up a little bit, and the back does drop down a tiny bit more than I'm comfortable with, and I do find towards the end of the day, if I'm sitting at my desk, that I'm like constantly moving it and feel like I have to pull it down, like it's rising up quite a bit. So I'm not sure if that's because there's not enough short rows in there, or if it's just something personally for me and my body that I like. If I was to knit this again, which I'm not sure I will, I don't know how many of these that I really need in my wardrobe, but if you're someone who finds that quite often patterns don't have enough short rows, or you like to add a few more, I would definitely recommend doing it for this one. So back to what I was saying with the collar, I definitely think blocking it in a different shape has helped a lot, as well as just general wear and relaxing of the fabric. I tried to block it so this was basically lying a lot more flat and down. It looked really funny when I was pinning it. It definitely didn't sit how it wanted to. I really had to like force it to lie a bit more flat rather than sticking up vertically. But I'm glad that I did that because it definitely seemed to work, and it sits a lot better on my body now. So I already mentioned that this yarn is a little bit more rustic, and I see why it was a recommended yarn for the pattern. I think it's perfect for colour work, especially something all over colour work like this one. The stitches are so crisp. You can really see how clear the colour work is. Nothing really blends together, and you get a really nice definition of the motif. And considering this is quite a lot of work, I won't lie, it's nice that your final result really shows how much work has gone into the garment. Saying that it is quite rustic, I don't find this itchy at all. I'm literally wearing this with no t-shirt or anything underneath, and that's not very common for me to be able to do. I found so many superwash yarns have been way more itchy than this one, and I was always under the assumption that if it's a non-superwash yarn and it's more rustic, I wouldn't be able to wear it. And I was a bit worried about this one because I did think I was going to struggle to wear it, especially against skin. And I don't find it's itchy at all, especially across here, across my back, where I'm usually more sensitive. I don't have any itchiness at all, and it's really good news. I'm so happy about that. It means that I can try more rustic yarns and not be worried about not being able to wear them. I've definitely felt superwash yarns that are way more itchy than this one for me personally. So that was a really nice surprise to have that experience with a yarn like this. It was quite a commitment going for an all over colorwork 4-ply sweater, and I have to say it did take me quite a while, but I thoroughly enjoyed every stitch of this. There was no point where I felt like, oh, this is such a slog, I have to keep going, there's another pattern repeat. I really felt like I wanted to keep working on it, and I'm really proud that my colorwork skills have gotten to this point. I've been on quite a journey with my colorwork over the past few months with different yarn and colorwork techniques. The way I knit this sweater was English style for both strands, so I would just drop each color as I didn't need it and then pick up the next one and then knit those stitches and then drop and pick it up again. And to catch floats, I would just manually twist the balls around, which I always thought would be the most tedious and annoying way of doing colorwork, but it works for me and that's all that really matters. It's obviously not the quickest way of doing colorwork, but I don't really mind that. It's the most enjoyable way for me, and more importantly, it's the way that I can get the most even and nicest looking tension and the best looking garment at the end of it. Because it is a 4-ply yarn, it did take me a lot longer than say if I was doing this in DK or a chunkier weight yarn, but it does mean that I think this is the most wearable garment for the climate that I live in. I always talk about how warm it is in this part of the world, and even today I am sitting by a window with the sun coming in. I'm probably going to get too hot wearing this, even though we're technically in winter. It still sits around above 19, 20, 21 degrees most days that we've had so far this month. It probably will get a little bit colder. So saying that, I feel like I'm going to get a lot more wear out of this colorwork sweater than something that's made with a chunkier, like a DK even weight yarn. The other colorwork sweater that I've made, my bonfire sweater, I think that's Aran weight, and I have never worn that. I finished it at the start of last summer, so it was too hot to wear when I finished it, and it just hasn't gotten cold enough yet this year to bring it out. So unfortunately, I'm not sure how much wear something like that will get, but I definitely feel like this is perfect for the climate that I live in. I mentioned in my last episode that the yellow centers are duplicate stitched on, and instead of buying another skein of the Isager Tvinni yarn, I found some tapestry wool in my local yarn store. I can't remember exactly what the name of it was, but they had heaps of different colors and you could buy like a really small quantity of them for a fairly affordable price. So I did that instead of buying a 100-gram skein that I would have lots of leftovers. I didn't even break into the second one, so one was more than enough. I have a small confession to make at the bottom of this sweater, and it is on the front and on the right side, but it's at the very bottom, so I'm not sure how noticeable it is, but let me stand up and show you. Basically, I was in quite a hurry to finish this because I just wanted to wear it and it was so beautiful that I wove in some of these ends on the right side. And actually this end here, something weird happened with my Italian bind off, and I think it broke in some parts of the yarn. It is quite a thin yarn and fairly easily breakable. Luckily, because it's quite rustic, the stitches kind of like mushed together a little bit, so it didn't unravel too much, but there was just a random thread of yarn going across my Italian bind off with some loose stitches underneath it. So I just kind of took an extra end of yarn and threaded it through the live stitches to make sure they didn't unravel any further, and then like wove those ends all in, and somehow accidentally did that on the right side. By the time I noticed, I did go and try and undo it, but because I had those live stitches in there, I didn't want to mess around with it too much and potentially drop them and then have them unravel. I think it might have been okay because it is a bit more of a toothy yarn, but I just couldn't be bothered, to be honest. I didn't want to take the risk, and because it's at the bottom, it's not that noticeable. I had a craft day last weekend, and one of the girls there did say that it is an Irish legend that you have to make a mistake in every project so you can let the fairies out. So I'm just going to go with that. I think I have some viewers who are from Ireland, so I'd be interested to hear if that is like a common folklore that you hear, but I thought that was very interesting. and a good rationale for making a mistake purposely and leaving it into each and every project. I think that's enough about the daisy sweater. Let's move on to finished object number 2, and it is another sweater that was also in the last episode, and this is my Cognac sweater. This is a design by Marine from Atelier Castin, and it is the second time I have knit this sweater. I'll try it on and then I can show it off a little bit better. So I knit this sweater in 2 strands held together. So the main strand is the Studio Donegal Darnie yarn, and the second strand is the CaMaRose Midnatssol yarn, which is kind of like a silk mohair alternative made with Surrey alpaca and a little bit of wool and I think tencel instead of silk. I bought the yarn from This Is Knit when I was in Dublin at the start of the year, and I bought it specifically to make this sweater. I was testing it at the time, and my first version is with the twisted rib, and I knew I would want another one with the I-cord, so I bought the yarn especially to make this sweater, and I'm really happy that it's finally in my wardrobe. So I knit the size 2 again for this one, and also on 5.5mm needles. The pattern recommends 6, but for me to get gauge, I did have to go down to a 5.5. So I already mentioned this one has the I-cord finishing on the neckline as well as on the sleeves and on the hem of the body, and I really like how different it makes the vibe of the sweater compared to the twisted rib. I like how the I-cord finishes transform this into more of a blouse than a sweater. It's kind of like a sweatshirt but looks a little bit more fancy and you feel a little bit more put together. So I've mainly found that I wear this with leggings or something if I'm going to Pilates, or if I'm working from home and I just want something to throw on but I want to feel a little bit more put together. This is definitely filling that space in my wardrobe. So I mentioned that I purchased this when I was on holiday and I had very limited space in my luggage, so I only bought 3 balls of the Midnatssol yarn, and I remember standing in the store being like, I should probably buy 4, but I'll just buy 3 because I probably want to buy more yarn on this trip. And if I don't have enough, maybe I can get a hold of another. Maybe I can just squeeze a sweater out of 3. So I did only buy 3 when I knew I should have bought 4 based on the meterage of the yarn. And because it is a little bit thicker than a silk mohair, I knew that I would probably have to break into a 4th one based on the meterage. So in the last episode, I think I'd finished the body and had started working on one of the sleeves. So I definitely wanted to finish the body first because I didn't want it to be too cropped, but I didn't mind the sleeves being a little bit shorter, like 3/4 or bracelet length, but I knew I wanted the body to at least be the minimum length that it is. So these are fairly high-waisted trousers, but you can see it definitely covers the waistband and it's not too cropped. The sleeves are a little bit above bracelet length, I would say. Luckily, because this is knit at quite a loose gauge, and because I guess of the fiber composition, I was able to stretch them out a pretty decent amount. Because I wear it at home as a bit more of like a comfy sweatshirt, if I'm cooking dinner in this, it is so handy not to have sleeves that are so long and constantly getting in the way. So that's an added bonus to having these slightly shorter sleeves, is that I'm not constantly pushing them up and they're not getting in my way at all. So I do like that feature. Usually I do find that I'll extend sleeves if they finish too short, but with the limited amount of yarn, I'm quite happy with the length of them. In my last episode, I made a comment about how in the test knit, the sleeve length was quite long and a lot of people took a little bit of length out of them. Marine kindly let me know that in the final pattern that you purchase on Ravelry, she did take out about 5 centimeters, I think, of the sleeve. So if you do purchase the pattern and make one, the sleeve length should be bang on based on what you get in the pattern. I really love this yarn combination. It was the first time I had used the Studio Donegal yarn, and as I was in Ireland, I felt like I had to give that yarn a go. It is super soft and airy and lightweight, and I think it pairs really well with the Midnatssol because of the lack of silk content, and I think as well the wool content in the CaMaRose Midnatssol. It's definitely not a one-to-one substitute for a silk mohair. You don't get that shininess and the huge halo, which is part of the draw of a silk mohair, but specifically for this project and pairing with this main yarn, I didn't want those features. I wanted the Darnie yarn to be the main focus of this sweater. I didn't want a huge halo and something shiny to draw away from the main yarn, especially because there's these beautiful tweedy bits in it. Hopefully you can see that there's some blues and greys and some tan colored speckles in here, And the second strand just adds to it. I don't think it detracts from the main fabric at all. It fills in the gaps just enough to allow for this loose gauge. I'm not wearing anything under this and it's not too see-through. You can see in the sunlight there is a tiny bit of a halo on this fabric, but together, the combination, I'm really pleased that I chose these two yarns together. I'll briefly talk about my third finished object. It's definitely not the most exciting and not something I ever thought I would be knitting, but I have knit a pair of the Skimmer socks. This is a free pattern by Sheila Stromberg, and I found out about this pattern from Tash's podcast, which is called Mostly Knitting. She's also an Australian podcaster. She's based in Sydney, and I have been watching her for quite a few months now, and her podcasts are very interesting. They're really succinct, they're straight to the point. She also puts out regular tutorials. I haven't watched any of those personally, but I have heard that they are very easy to follow. She is a maths teacher, so I think her teaching skills naturally transfer over to knitting. I would definitely recommend checking out her podcast. So that's where I discovered the pattern, and I've seen her knit a few pairs of these socks, so I thought I would give them a go just to see if it was something that I liked or something that I would be able to use a lot of scraps for. So as you can see, they are teeny tiny socks, and you can definitely get away with the smallest amount of scraps that you have sitting in your stash. I used the needles that are recommended for this pattern, so I used a 2.25 for the main bit of the sock, and then I went down to a 2mm for the ribbing. So when I first got into sock knitting, I bought the small 23 centimeters and then also 60 centimeter long ChaoGoo like red lace needles, and I bought them in 2.5, like every size up to 3mm basically, so I'd have a whole set for sock knitting. And somehow my 60 centimeter 2mm needles have vanished. I can find like the packaging that I keep them in, but I don't know where the actual needles are, and I feel like I very rarely use them. Maybe I've used them once and they're just not there. So long story short, they've gone missing, and I only have my small like 23 centimeter 2mm needles, so I had to do the whole ribbing on these tiny little needles. And even the bind off as well was a little bit challenging, so that did put me off a little bit from trying to finish the second sock. I feel like they took quite a while considering how small they are. Definitely something like this you could make in a weekend if you were focused on it and you had enough time, but I think these were on the needles for at least a couple of weeks, which is a long time for socks for me. Of course, if you're not keen on going down to a 2mm needle, you could probably do the ribbing on a 2.25. I think the pattern also says you can go to a 2.5 for the main sock and then a 2.25 for the ribbing. Because I am a bit of a looser knitter, I do like to knit socks on 2.25 if they're fingering weight. So I did use scraps for these that I had in my stash. That was the main reason I wanted to make a pair, was because I do have a lot of tiny scraps left over from socks, and I thought these would be a good way to use them up. So the green yarn is the Dying to Knit Luscious sock base in the colour Pistachio, who is a local dyer here in Perth, and the pink is an Australian dyer base, I think in Adelaide. It is the ColaGirl Collective Dapper base in the colour Primrose, and both of these, like I said, were leftovers from socks that I had made. I think both of them I'd made from the 52 Weeks of Socks book. So for this pair of socks, the green only used 24 grams and the pink only used, I think, about 7 grams. So you can definitely get away with using quite small amounts of scraps. So originally I took a measurement of my foot, and based on the pattern and the instructions, I should be knitting the 72 stitch size, which is much bigger than what I normally knit for myself for vanilla socks, but I went ahead and did it anyway, and they were way too big even before I blocked them. Both of them are quite smooth superwash yarns that I know grow quite a lot, so I had to rip that one out, and then I went down to the 56 stitch size, which is what I normally do for socks for myself. I'm not sure where that discrepancy came from. I actually haven't measured my gauge on this, so maybe it was to do with gauge. I also have quite high arch in my foot, so maybe that has interfered with it, but I would suggest just going with whatever your regular stitch count is for socks if you're going to make a pair for yourself. So once I block these ones, they do fit me pretty well. They're a little bit snug, but I feel like for these types of invisible sneaker socks, you definitely want them to be quite snug. The bind off is a little bit too tight though. I have worn these once, so that's why they are looking a little bit dirty, but the bind off did dig into my heel just a little bit when I was wearing them. in shoes, so I'm not sure if I would want to go any looser. I don't know if then they would slip down. Maybe with a few more wears I would get used to that and they would stretch out to be the right size. But definitely something to keep in mind is to not bind off super tight. That was an interesting experiment, little scrappy project. I'm not sure if I'll be making any more. My intention was that I had the yarn scraps and it's a free pattern, so I'll just make a pair. They didn't take super long. I let them drag on the needles for longer than I probably should have, just because, like I mentioned, with the small needles, and it was just kind of boring to be knitting them, to be honest, compared to my other whips that I had going on at the time. So I've knit one pair, I've worn them once, and they're good. They didn't slip down, but I can't say that I prefer them over my regular like invisible socks that I have that are store-bought. I have so many pairs of those that it's going to take me a while to wear through all of them. So I just don't think I need more pairs of these skim socks in my wardrobe just yet. I have heard other people say that they find regular ready-to-wear invisible socks do slide down on them a lot and they don't like wearing them, and they found that the Skimmer socks fit that need a lot better and they don't slip down. So maybe I can see how people would make multiple pairs, but for me personally, I think one pair is more than enough. I've been talking for like half an hour and we're only just through my finished objects, so let's hurry on through my works in progress. So if you saw my last video, I did a little bit of a run through of some finished objects that I either wanted to fix up or frog, and you did get a sneak peek of this work in progress in that video. I didn't go into too much detail because I knew I would share about it a little bit more here, but this is the All My Figure dress, but it will be the sweater version. So the dress is a design by Stine Jørgensen, also known as All My Knits over on Instagram, and she released this dress pattern I think a few years ago now. The All My Figure dress is this beautiful 2x2 ribbed dress that also has options to make a skirt, a t-shirt and a sweater following the same instructions. I did knit the dress version back a few years ago now, I can't remember exactly when, but I really enjoyed knitting it and knew that I would want to make a sweater version as well. I mentioned in my last video that this is the Drops Baby Merino, and I frogged it from my Spring Fling tee, which is by the Petite Knitter, because quite honestly, I never wore it. I go into detail about why I never wore it and the issues I had with that garment in my last video, but I'm happy to report that I think this one is going to get a lot more wear, and most importantly, this yarn is more suitable for this project. So the All My Figure dress is kind of like a made-to-measure pattern. You select a size based on your bust circumference, and then you have increments to go up or down in your waist or your hip area depending on the measurements that are given. So for example, if you have an 80 centimeter bust, but your hips kind of fit into this category and your waist fits into this category, you can mix and match different sizes in the pattern to fit your body perfectly. I mentioned in my last video, this is not a size inclusive pattern. It only goes up to a 120 centimeter bust size. However, the designer does say a few times that you can contact her if your size is not included in the pattern, and they will do the calculations for you and basically send you the pattern with your numbers in it. I did get a comment in my last video as well, basically saying that there's a reason why it's not size inclusive, and that's because it wouldn't look good on people with a bust size bigger than 120 centimeters. I really don't think it's up to a designer, another knitter, a complete stranger to say what looks good or what doesn't look good on a person. I think it's only up to the knitter themselves. They are the only ones who get to decide what looks good or looks bad on them, which of course is subjective. So I think the whole point of having size inclusive patterns is that the designer doesn't get to decide what this design looks good on and who this design looks good on. I have had a few comments like that before, so I did just want to clear the air a little bit, and that is why I do mention when patterns aren't size inclusive and why I do only try to knit size inclusive patterns. I will, however, mention that I'm not a pattern designer and I don't know how much work goes into designing patterns and whether having more sizes is more work or, you know, other obstacles like that. So that's out of the way. Let's go back onto talking about the pattern. So it is not for the faint of heart. There are so many instructions, it is super detailed, and there is a lot of information and pages and pages and pages of pattern, which can be a really good thing. I think for this in particular, it is needed and it is succinct where it needs to be, but it is easy to also miss really important information. Because I have knit this before, I'm not finding it too difficult. I'm finding it a lot easier than the first time I knit it because I kind of already understood how the pattern was written and the construction, so I can kind of just follow along and skim read a little bit more. But yeah, there is so much that's going on all at once. Saying that though, it is a really fun knit and you really get into it because each section is kind of broken down and you just want to reach the next section. Like, you want to finish those repeats and get on to the next thing and see what that looks like. And the way that the ribbing moves around the garment also just makes you want to keep going because you really want to see where the lines go next. So I've just started at the neck and the yoke. It's basically kind of like a raglan. Like, these bits here are the raglan increases, and then it's the same on the back as well. So these parts here kind of stay the same in that you have the 3 knit columns, and these move all the way around the body in such a beautiful way, and it's definitely what drew me to the pattern. So once you're in the groove of the pattern, it's really hard to put down. The only reason that I put this down is because I ran out of yarn and I had to frog my spring fling tee in order to keep going on this one. But I have a test knit now that's taking priority, so this one will just be on the back burner until I finish that test knit. Because the yarn is frogged from another project, and the yarn was frogged from another project before that project, it has been through it, to be honest. Before I made my spring fling tee, I did wash the yarn and make sure to get out all the crinkles, but as you can see on this one, I haven't bothered to do that, and it does look a little bit uneven in the fabric that it's knit up. But I did swatch, and I also swatched with noodle yarn, and when I blocked this, it honestly turned out fine, so I don't think I'm going to bother washing it again. I just honestly cannot be bothered, and because my swatch turned out really well, I'm pretty happy to just go along with it. If it gets to a point where it's annoying and I'm struggling to tension the yarn evenly, then I'm happy to go and wash it, but it's not bothering me at the moment. And honestly, I was just too excited to get started on that project, so I just went ahead and did it anyway, and hoping for the best. So I did just mention that I'm doing a test knit, and this is a very exciting test knit to me. I am test knitting the Lunan tee, which is a design that is coming out by Rebecca Clow. She has a podcast called the Creabea podcast, and I have been watching her podcast for quite a few years. And then she got into designing, and I've knit quite a few of her designs before. And when I first saw this design on her Instagram, I knew I was going to make it. I thought I would just apply for the test knit anyway. I wasn't sure if I was going to be accepted, but I was very excited when I was. So the Lunan tee is like most of Rebecca's patterns. There are so many options. There is a 4-ply and a DK weight version, and also the option to do a polo neck or like a round crew neck as well. I've gone for the 4-ply version and also the polo neck. So this is an all over 3x1 ribbed design, and as you can see, I'm just working on the other front panel at the moment. So I am knitting the second size of this pattern, and I'm using the Filcolana Arwetta in the color caramel, which is 363. I have used this yarn before for my balloon sweater. I held it with a strand of Drops Kid Silk, and I really like how it knit up in there. Even though it's a mohair, I still try and wear that sweater. It's so itchy, but I really like how it looks, so I just push through it, to be quite honest. This is a really soft superwash merino with 20% nylon in it, so it is a sock yarn, and funnily enough, I've never used it for socks. I've only used it for my balloon sweater, but I wanted to use it for this one because I was thinking I was going to wear it against skin, and I knew that this would be okay for me to wear against skin. This is technically more of a summer design, but being a Southern Hemisphere knitter, I am wanting to my winter knits at the moment. That's why I decided to go for a woolly version instead. And I am planning on going for long sleeves. So I did purchase a few extra balls of the yarn, so I would have enough to extend it into long sleeves. I think this will be a really nice classic piece to have in my wardrobe. It took me a while to deliberate on the color. I was thinking I would go for the marzipan color, the same as my balloon sweater, but they didn't have it in stock when I ordered this one from the yarn bowl. The main neutral color they had that wasn't grey was this caramel color. It's a bit different to what I would normally go for. I've never knit or bought anything in this kind of caramelly brown color, but I think I'll really like it. I think this will be a really great piece to just wear every day that can be dressed up or dressed down, which is pretty much how I wear all of my knits. I like being able to wear them for multiple occasions and style them in different ways. Like I said, I'm knitting the second size, and I'm gonna have a lot more positive ease than I thought I would. When I applied for the test, I don't know if something changed between the bust circumference in the testing call document versus what we were given. I'm not sure what happened because I did say in the Instagram group chat, I'm going to have like 16 plus centimeters of positive ease, which is quite a lot and a lot more than what I thought I had applied for. And a few other testers said the same thing. So I'm not sure if something changed there, but to be honest, I think because this will be a bit more of like a sweater vibe, being that it's woolly, I think it will be absolutely fine. And to be honest, the worst case, I really don't like the fit. It's too oversized for me. I can just pass it on to my sister and I know she'll look really good in this. To be honest, she'll probably look better in it than I would, especially this color. But I'll see how I feel when I finished it. This was probably another design that I think I'll make multiple versions of. In terms of the knitting and test knitting process, I mentioned that the sizes might have changed a bit. I don't really know what happened there, but I'm more than happy to be continuing on the size 2. But this is actually the second time that I've knit up to this point. So I have knitted all of this before and this is where I got up to. So you can see that I knit the whole back and then I finished the other front panel and actually joined those in the front, and I was ready to join in the round and my ribbing pattern just didn't line up. There are some decreases in, I think, the sides of this. There's a few places where there's decreases, and when I went to cast on the stitches at the underarm and then join in the round for the ribbing, there was just no way that I could get it to work. I would have had to really fudge it and I just wasn't really willing to do that, especially because that would have continued like the whole way down the body if you had like a weird odd knit stitch here or like 2 pearls next to each other. I sent a message in the group chat and asked if like anyone else had that issue or if that was how it was supposed to be, because I didn't really want the ribbing to not continue neatly all the way around. And then I sent it in the evening my time, and then by the time I woke up there was a whole new tester document. Basically the pattern had been rewritten, like most of the numbers had changed, and I was like, oh my goodness, that was a very quick turnaround. So that's been very positive experience in terms of test knitting, is that the response and the turnaround time on queries is so quick. It was a little bit disheartening to wake up and realize everything I had knit and spent a good chunk of a week on, I was going to have to reknit. But to be fair, that's just part of the testing process and it's kind of what you sign up for. She was very apologetic and she said, oh, this never happens. And I was like, it probably happens in so many other test knits. And it's kind of what you almost anticipate when you sign up for a test knit, that you're going to encounter mistakes. You might have to frog and restart and change things. She also did say that people could continue on with the previous version. And I think some people did, but I was more than happy to start again because this is so much fun. I'm loving the 3x1 rib, especially in this yarn. It's like super bouncy and I can't wait to block it and see how it all looks. So I just need to finish the other front panel and then join those together, and then I can join the body in the round, and then I'll probably jump onto the polo collar. I'm really looking forward to seeing how that construction works. I haven't done anything like that before. I think there's quite a bit of double knitting involved, which will take a while at this gauge, but that's okay. I think it will be really fun. I think the sun is in a really awkward position, so I'm going to try and shuffle myself around to make it look a little bit better. I just closed the blind behind me, so hopefully it's not too dark now, but stick through it. We only have one more work in progress to share. This is another of Rebecca's designs, and it's one that's already been released, and actually one that I have already knit before. So I am knitting the Lanark sweater, and I'm knitting this in the Drops Soft Tweed in this beautiful brown color. I think it's called Grizzly Bear, and it has these beautiful light specks of tweed in it. So this is an all over half fisherman's rib quarter zip sweater, and like I said, it's the second time I'm making it. I knit one for my sister the start of this year. She's been getting a lot of wear out of that. I was hanging out with her the other week and she was wearing it and I was like, oh, I really want to make my own version as well. She just looks so cool in it. I mean, she looks so cool in everything. She's definitely the cooler sister of the pair of us. But yeah, she looked really good in it, so I was looking forward to having one for myself. And I actually bought this yarn at the same time as I bought the yarn for hers because I knew that I would want to make one for myself. I knit hers also in the Drop Soft Tweed, but in this really nice mid grey colour. I'm knitting the first size in this pattern, and I'm also using the recommended needles for this one. I do find that my gauge must be quite similar to Rebecca's because I don't have to go down a needle size in her designs. So this is knit on 3.5mm needles. So as you can see, I have knit the collar and I have finished the yoke as well. And at this point, I should have joined in the round to start the body in the round, as everything else is knit flat back and forth. But based on my learnings from my first sweater, I am actually going to knit the front and the back panels and also the sleeves completely flat. I very speedily knit the first version, so even though it was featured on the podcast, I didn't really go into much detail about the process of knitting it. It just kind of flew off the needles, and then all of a sudden it was done, and I had actually gifted it to her, so I didn't really get a chance to talk about it very much. So basically, when I was knitting the first version, I realized that my half fisherman rib tension and appearance when I was working flat versus in the round was quite different. It just looked really like flat and not very textured. When I was working in the round, you can probably see that the stitch definition is really plump, and the kind of knit and slip columns like are really prominent, and they kind of stick out a little bit more in the fabric. I just found that when I was knitting in the round, they were super flat and spread out, and I didn't like it. I also didn't really like the process of knitting it in the round. There's too much purling. It was weird. I was in the rhythm of doing it flat, and I thought, I'm just going to seam it up at the end. The added benefit to that actually was it added a little bit more structure into the side seams and the sleeves. I think the composition of this yarn has some alpaca in it. Let me just have a look. So there's 50% wool, 25% alpaca, and 25% viscose. So I think the alpaca content in the yarn definitely shows through in the fabric. It's quite drapey and floppy. You can see the collar doesn't stand up very well by itself, and I don't mind that. I think I would probably wear it open anyway, and once the zipper is in there with the facing, it does add a little bit of structure as well. So I definitely found that adding the seams just added that little bit of extra strength that I wanted for the garment, and I'm just going to do the same thing for this one. The half fisherman's rib does go by a little bit slower, but once you're in the rhythm of it, I find that it's really enjoyable to knit, and yeah, I'm just getting along with this very well. Similarly to the All My Figure sweater, this is kind of on the back burner until I finish my test knit. I'm definitely one of those people that can only have one test knit at a time. I was talking to someone who had like 3 test knits on at once, and I was like, how do you not stress yourself out? Like, how do you keep track of all the deadlines and all of the like Instagram group chats that are going on? So that brings us to the end of the projects that I had to share today. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it a little bit interesting. I love sharing all my projects and talking through the process of all of them. And I also love reading the comments that people leave. It's very nice. Most of them are super kind, and it's just nice to hear some sweet words from some lovely people. So thanks so much for watching. Bye.